Today was filmed in front of a live studio audience, but they were really quiet that day, so you probably can't hear them. But I promise they were clapping. They really liked it. I swear, anyone that reads The Hunger Games and is still Team Gale by the end, red flag. I mean, I could write a whole 10-page paper on why it's Team PETA, although... You didn't tell me that we had started filming. Hello, and welcome to Social Studies Today, at Home Edition. I'm your lead anchor, Miss Grady. Tonight's top stories: President Andrew Jackson and the American government forced Native American tribes to relocate in what is being called the Trail of Tears. Native Americans continue to be taken advantage of and paraded around like zoo animals, and Native American children are kidnapped and forced to change their entire identity. We've also got your travel forecast for the week. Planning to move out west in search of some gold? We've got some things you need to know before you load up your covered wagon. More on that after this quick word from our sponsor.
This episode of Social Studies Today is sponsored by MAPS. Please follow them if you intend to go out west. No, the shortcut your uncle's best friend's cousin swears by is not going to work out. You will be stuck in some mountain range for the winter and will, most likely, be forced to participate in cannibalism. Don't do that to yourself. Just follow the map.
Our first story takes place in the South, where many Native American tribes were living. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case for long, as President Andrew Jackson passed, against all reason, the Indian Removal Act. These Native American tribes were forced to walk thousands of miles and leave everything they had ever known behind. More on this story is our lead correspondent, Mr. Snow.
Let's look at this map. This is going to give you kind of an idea of where the Trail of Tears took place and the different paths that they took. And you're going to notice they're not all straight lines. And that's for a reason. You see, they were forced to move in these weird patterns, not just because of geography, but because of cities and counties. And these cities and counties did not want Native Americans anywhere near them, so they basically warned them not to come through. Other places actually charged them money to go through. In the case of the Ohio River, there was a ferry that would ferry people from one side to the other. They would cost 12 cents for the average person. But they uppriced it for the Native Americans. They uppriced it to $1 a piece. And back then, that was a decent amount of money. So these Native Americans who didn't have a lot of money actually couldn't afford this ferry. And because of that, they actually froze to death on one side of the Ohio River. Back to you, Miss Grady.
Thanks, Mr. Snow. Our next story involves an individual who has been taken advantage of by the American government. His story is just one example of how the American government disrespected many members of the Native American tribes. I'm so glad he could join us in the studio today. Hello, sir. Can you please start with your name and what tribe you are a member of?
It's good to be here to have my story heard by others. As you know, my name is Geronimo and I am from the Apache Nation.
So, I know you have quite the story to tell us about your journey. Could you tell us a little bit about where you came from and what happened?
I was part of the Apache tribe. I was a medicine man, and our tribe was warring with the Mexican military at the time when I was a young man. I eventually may have a wife, and I'd have children, and at one point the Mexican troops went into our tribe, and it burned most of it to the ground, killing my wife, my child, or actually 3 of my children, and also killing my mother. At this point, I devoted my life to kill the Mexican authorities who took my wife and children from me.
That's absolutely awful. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Condolences. I did have a little luck in getting back against the Mexican government. I heard a voice that told me a bullet will never wound me. And I would devote most of my time going in and raiding Mexican camps and killing Mexican soldiers.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about what happened next?
I can tell you what happened next. After many years of fighting the Mexican soldiers, eventually U.S. troops stationed themselves next to our Apache tribe. We got along with them at first. We traded goods, and then after a while, our fun relationship turned brutal. You see, they were eating most of our food resources. They were taking the cattle that we needed as well as other things. And a scuffle took place, and eventually we started fighting the U.S. government. For 30 years, we fought the Mexican and U.S. government. Towards the end of these 30 years, I would be captured. And they forced me to sign a surrender, basically at the expense of my tribe. I sign it or my tribe gets obliterated. So I signed it. And then they shipped me off into the east of your country, and they basically paraded me around towns. Kids would come up to me as if I was Santa Claus. Hey, it's Geronimo. And I had to play the part of a circus clown, if you will, just to get enough money to feed myself. Doing this for 10 years was mind-numbingly sad because I was away from my family. So I actually talked to Theodore Roosevelt, your president at the time, and when I did, I asked him, can I go back to see my family? The Apache at this point had not attacked the U.S. government for 10 years. I did what I was told for 10 years. And the response I got from the U.S. president was no. I would spend the rest of my time away from my family playing that circus act of Geronimo, the Native American, that people would come and, hiss and talk and giggle at me.
Moving on to our next story, boarding schools. The American government continued to suppress Native American culture by passing pieces of legislation such as the Dawes Act. This act, in the United States government's opinion, was to Americanize Native Americans in many different ways. But the biggest thing to come out of this Dawes Act were the number of boarding schools popping up across the country where Native American children were kidnapped and sent to. These boarding schools taught Native American children to hate their past and stripped them of their identity. The entire mission of these boarding schools can be summed up in a quote by Richard Pratt, one of the superintendents of the boarding schools. He said, "Kill the Indian, save the man." And that is what they believed. There were 350 boarding schools total. In the year 1900, there were 30,000 students, but by 1925, there were 60,000 students. Here's a photo of 3 Lakota boys at the Carlisle School in the year 1900. You can see in these photos the before and after, one in their regular clothes, the other photo in clothes that were given to them at the boarding school. You can see that their identity had been slowly taken away from them, even just by looking at this photo. They had cut their hair, changed their clothes, and you can see how the stiffness between each photo shows how uncomfortable they were and how sad they were. You can look on their faces as well. These kids were also very, very young. It's crazy to think that at such a young age, a kid could be kidnapped from their home and taken away from everything that they had ever known and put into a place so full of hate for who they are as people.
Howdy, folks. My name is Piper. Are you thinking about moving out west? Well, here's some things you need to know. First, make sure you know where you're going. The terrain on the trails can be kind of rough, so it's important to plan the safest route possible. Second, make sure you pack a lot of extra food. And I mean a lot. You don't want to end up like the Donner Party. Yikes. Third thing you have to remember is if you are going out for the gold rush, keep your expectations high. I heard there's a ton of gold out there. I'm thinking about heading west myself. What could go wrong? Well, that's all I have for you. Turning things back over to my roommate, Ms. Grady.
Well, that's our show. I want to thank you all for tuning in to this special episode of Social Studies Today, at Home Edition. This is your lead anchor, Miss Grady, signing off. And as my friend Harold says, treat people with kindness. She looks scared to be here. Okay, bye. What do you think? Oh.